Welcome. One Graham. Welcome to the
1 Gram Army Podcast.
Thank you for listening to my daddy's stupid podcast. And remember, his head is full of doo-doo, so don't listen to anything he says.
Generals, welcome to the 1 Gram Army Podcast. I am Graham. Joining me today, are we using your real name?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, James Warner, a friend of mine and a co-worker, is here. Don't forget, you can get this glorious 1 Gram Army Podcast t-shirt by visiting shirtcaviar.com. Go check that out. There's some other stuff. Our Time's Up No Rape Dolphin shirt is doing pretty well right now. And thank you, sir, for joining me here today.
Hey, no problem. I'm here to defend dolphins.
Yeah. Yes. James is here as an advocate of dolphins, and this is the great debate. But no, so I brought you here, just a little background for listeners. We worked together, without getting into like specifics. We spent a lot of time on the road together, and a few years ago, you spend hours and hours sitting in a truck with somebody blithering. You learn a little bit about each other, and I've intended to have you on for quite a while now because you have a really interesting story. I guess I'll kind of let you take over from here as far as background is concerned, about where you grew up and under what circumstances those were.
Well, yeah, born and raised a Jehovah's Witness, grew up in Wyoming. Lots of fun. Yeah,
sounds like it. They seem like a really fun group. The more I've researched about them. Well, I think what was interesting for me was that when I very first heard you talk about this, the town and the politics of where you grew up and how deeply entrenched the witnesses were there, I had never heard of anything of the sort.
Man, I don't know where to go with that. I think maybe you might have a little misunderstanding there. Mm-hmm. It isn't so much the town they're entrenched in. Am I too close?
No, you're good.
No,
good.
Okay.
Just pointing it at your face.
It was more like the community. That's how cultish they are.
Right.
It isn't so much this. The town I grew up in, Casper. It had about 50,000 people when I lived there. It's got more now, but they're not. You are so locked into the community. They keep you separated from somebody so
you're actually isolated
you're
from
isolated.
The surrounding
very
town.
Very cultish in the way it happens. So I knew other kids. I wasn't allowed to hang out with them. Occasionally they'd come over, but I learned years later that from one of the kids I went to school with that he'd called one day and been like, hey, can James come over? And it's like my mom was like, no, he can't. And she would always interfere in that, wouldn't allow me to hang out with all these other kids. And, because they're not witnesses, so they're evil, they're gonna die. And
so you're actually even like isolated within
within
your
it's
community. Almost like being imprisoned in plain sight.
Kind
of a situation. And I think for me and a lot of people who aren't aware of this, because the most interesting thing I've discovered is like there's a ton of source material on this. Journalists have fallen on this sword time and time and time again without it becoming like it doesn't have the vitriol. It doesn't have the, I don't want to use the word appeal. It doesn't have the mass media appeal though of like scandals in the Catholic Church or, actual like small cults that are easy to infiltrate or expose. It seems that, in my experience, the Jehovah's Witnesses were just people who show up at my house on Saturday and bother me.
And annoy you, yeah.
Yeah, and that's, to me, I thought that was the extent of it, but I was sorely mistaken in that assumption.
Yeah, and they've been hit hard, and it's not no one outside really the community except of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that that it's been getting bigger and bigger in the news. They've been hit with some lawsuits over there covering up child abuse, and you want to get into all of their issues. There have been some things that are criminal, other things that are just purely hypocritical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can kind of go, I don't know how to put it. There is kind of a movement against them right now within the ex-JW community. Those who are no longer members that want them to be yanked out of the whole. Yeah. They especially want them to be pulled from being considered a a religion, you know,
right.
no longer tax exempt.
No longer tax exempt, right.
Because they don't, you know, their claims for charity are complete bull crap.
Yeah.
If there was ever a true investigation put into that, I think they would fail miserably and they would actually lose it. But,
right, to see how the actual money is being allocated.
Yeah.
Because it's a large religion. I mean, it's hardly fringe. I mean, obviously I think that you know, I don't know that they have the same numbers as like the LDS or one of those groups, but they're you find them everywhere. They're not hard to find, and they'll come find you, from what I understand too. So they have the money, they have the means. And actually, as you touched on this deal with child molesters, this is all just research I've done in the time since you melted my brain in a truck one time years ago, about I guess the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is a recent article too, actually, that I read today that's from April 5th of this year, updating that I guess the Jehovah's Witnesses are in possession of what amounts to the largest list of undocumented child molesters ever compiled. Essentially, in the 90s, they sent out a letter to other Jehovah's Witnesses asking them to document anyone they knew of
to the congregations. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were also very specific to make sure that this information was kept quiet, that they weren't the goal of this compiling of this information wasn't to hold anyone accountable.
No.
It was to prevent them from legal repercussions as a result of harboring child molesters.
Yeah, and what they put it out as is, you know, we don't want to bring reproach on God's name, on Jehovah's name. And, you know, however you want to view that, to me, it's pure hypocrisy that, you know,
of course.
They say, they like to say, well, we're letting Jehovah handle it. And to me, it's like when you have a child telling you, this person's hurting me, isn't that God telling you, get this person out of my congregation? You know, this person's hurting, but, you know, and I mean, that's a problem you see within all real religions, you know, that cover this up. You know, they claim it's for, you know, for theocratic reasons, but in reality, they don't want to give up their power. And anytime they have to admit there's something wrong and they're full of crap.
Yeah, anytime. You know? Well, and they're
going to lose it. So.
Yeah, any of these major religions, if exposing of a systemic issue is always a big deal with them. And I think that's something not a lot of people understand. Like casual followers of the news probably don't understand that this isn't just an issue within the Catholic Church. You construct an organization that is alleging to be teaching the word of the almighty fourth dimensional creator of the universe. That's a lot of power to wield, you know, and it is a perfect resting place for people looking to do harm.
It gives people access to victims, because it's the funny thing about when you're dealing with faith, you're dealing with something that's so unknown. It's different than like a scientific community or even a government or legal community. There you're dealing with facts. You're dealing with faith, you're dealing with the unknown. So this tends to touch people. You know, that's probably the wrong word to use.
I wasn't going to point it out.
No, but it tends to take a deeper. It tends to be a deeper issue where you just got to believe. Right. So, you know, you're dealing with people's faith, and this person's telling you, well, God's appointed this person as, you know, his representative, so you have to trust him. You have to believe in him, and, you know.
Well, and you're talking about children too. Yeah. So it's so cowardly and so disgusting too, because you're preying on the innocence of children, the mushiness of their brain, their desire to be given information, to like have someone guide them and tell them, you know, the world is confusing. I'll make this simple for you. And then in some circumstances, the simple answer is I'm here to talk to you as appointed by the man in the cloud,
Yeah.
and then therefore literally everything I say is gospel, and then that person takes advantage of someone, and then it spirals into something like this, where this massive corporation essentially, they have all of the resources and legal resources of a corporation, and they also are free from government interference in their finances.
Yeah.
You have this massive organization circling the wagons around these people, and it turns into this story about these, they sent out 12,000 letters to people asking them.
Yeah. And the thing about that is how that came to light, from what I understand, is you had elders who saw this letter, who helped compile this information, that eventually realized that, this whole thing's a joke. This whole religion is no different than any other religion out there. Right. So, they, when they come out, and in fact, one of the sites, the woman who started it actually spent several decades at Bethel, the headquarters, and she actually saw this list apparently, and compiled a whole bunch. She was working on this book, which was the witnesses' version of their history. Right. Yeah. I remember when this book came out. This thing's huge. Well, and
you have to have that if you're an organization like that. You have to write the history.
Yeah, and she's looking at these things, realizing and through her story, you can see her realization that everything's a fraud. And she's one of the main people behind this. I can't remember her name, but she's the one it's Silent Lambs.
The name of the book.
No, that's the name of her website.
Yeah, let me check it out here real quick.
Yeah, you'll get a lot of good information off that if when it comes to the real story behind it, because she was actually there. It's kind of like being the soldier in the middle of the battlefield,
Yeah, wow. Yeah, she is. The website I'm looking at here is definitely. She's not pulling any punches here about what her mission is here, and she has places here where people can report sexual abuse, against specific church entities. Her personal experiences are listed here. I'm trying to find this woman's name here. Hold on, let me see here. A lot of this is about Silence of the Lambs. Yeah. But anyway, we'll find it out.
Not quite, but okay.
Not exactly. But a lot of this though, I really prepared myself for this podcast by being like, I don't want this to turn into just like wanton religion bashing, which sometimes is super fun. I'm not gonna lie to people. Yeah. There is something inherently in human beings where, like, if you find something that's super abhorrent to you, it's really easy to hate it, which kind of goes back to the Jehovah's, because through some of the stuff you sent me, this constant message about God being disgusted by you, or you turning your back on his love, and him being he hates these things. It's very important for them to tell you that God hates a lot of stuff.
And that one I sent you because it's absolutely funny. But that's just, like you said, the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. They have other ones. I remember, this is after I've left. I've been out over a decade. But they have one that I read that it was just funny to me, where they talk about how you talk and think when you're at home. You should only talk about theocratic things. You should only think about theocratic things. If you're having dinner with somebody, where's the conversation going? Is it only theocratic things? You should only discuss. It's complete mind control. Yeah. It's funny, but when I was kind of watching that video I sent you, I hadn't actually watched that whole thing. That was the wrong video. I meant to send you the amended part on just the pillow.
I appreciate it. I needed the whole video. Well, in background for listeners, just real quick, James sent me a video, and I am going to play a little clip of it against James's advice, and he's probably right. But my job on this podcast is to be as wrong as possible most of the time. But
that works.
But I'm going to play a clip of it. But it is mind bending. This video, I guess it was an internal video. Where is Bethel? What is that?
Okay, Bethel, well, it's their headquarters. It's where they do all the printing. It originally was in New York. They just sold it's Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. That's the funny thing about this, is they just sold that building. They moved out to a town called Wallkill, New York, which is, that in itself was a whole new story. But they're building in Brooklyn. They've been in since the 1900s, and they just sold it for a couple of $1 billion to Jared Kushner, from what I understand.
Wow.
Yeah, of all people.
This never stops with these folks.
Yeah, it's like big deals.
But yeah, so I guess Bethel is a place where witnesses go to work.
Yeah,
and
well, it's their main headquarters where they print all this literature, their Bibles, the magazines, everything. They do their podcasts. That's become something recent. They made the cartoons there that we were watching earlier.
Jesus.
Yeah. And they just moved up all that up to Wallkill, but that's the big deal. That's how they can make all this money and keep their costs down, as they get people to volunteer to come. It's considered a big deal.
Yeah, it's like being
to be a
called
Bethelite.
up.
Yeah, it's as sort of like being a priest called to the Vatican,
Right,
you're there.
Them, absolutely.
Yeah, you're there at the center of things, and that's the center point was right there in New York, and it's now in Wallkill. So
yeah, and so the video you sent me though I guess it's like and I'm going to play it. Calm down, everybody. But just give me a minute. But so the video you sent me though, I guess is this particular video you sent me that we're discussing is like. It's I guess was meant for internal use at Bethel, or to be disseminated only to witnesses, and it's some very specific advice about ignoring every fiber of your natural being, essentially, and it's outlaid by the creepiest person I've ever seen in my life, and like you mentioned though too, where they were talking about how when you're at home you should only be thinking about the church, you should only be talking about the church, and this is like in your own thoughts, if your thoughts are not in line with what this guy's talking about, God is disgusted with you and your thoughts and the things that like just naturally make you a human being disgust God. And we'll get to the specifics of that video too though,
actually it's meant only for people that go to Bethel.
Wow.
This isn't even for the rest of the witnesses.
It wasn't even disseminated amongst witnesses.
From what I understand, it wasn't supposed to go to them.
It seems like it. It feels like the creepiest new employee orientation video I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, I think that speaks to that too. And I think that there are people who would disagree, I guess, in some respect. Or if you want to play devil's advocate, you can be like, well, this is the dogma of their religion. It's important to spread that. But this isn't being spread like an abstract idea, like, hey, we're open to discussion. This isn't like early Lutheranism where they're like, hey, let's bounce some ideas around about the nature of God. This is black and white stuff about what makes you as a person. If it falls into these categories, God is disgusted with your existence.
Yeah. And
yeah.
You gotta, go ahead. I would say play it.
Yeah. Okay. We can check a little bit out here. Yeah. So I've got it pulled up here to a very important section of it. This is the wrong video. This is for the end. I'll play that too though. So this is an important section of this video. Where'd my mouse go? Technical difficulties. But so this is him discussing this gentleman here. If you're an audio only listener, I encourage you to look it up if for no other reason than to look at this guy. This is him discussing, I think I've pulled it up to the part about, I'll let him explain it.
A second way you need to keep on guard is resisting the unclean habit of masturbation. The God's Love book explains that masturbation is the stroking or rubbing of the genital organs, commonly resulting in an orgasm. So, does a person have to use their hands to masturbate?
This is good.
For example, say a brother wears an undergarment that's so tight it rubs his penis as he moves around. He gets aroused and even ejaculates.
Not to stop it, but my first question was, where do I get these underwear?
Yeah.
Is he masturbating? Yes, he is, because he's deliberately stimulating his genitals, even though he's not using his hands. Does there have to be an orgasm for it to be considered masturbation? Suppose a brother starts rubbing his genitals against a pillow.
He's got this desk here.
He gets an erection, but stops before having an orgasm.
Just the way he says
Is he
that.
masturbating?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Again, because he's deliberately stimulating himself,
He's legitimately
whether
excited.
he has an orgasm or not.
Just stifling it.
How about having an emission of semen at night, maybe even after an erotic dream? Is that masturbation? No. Jehovah made that a part of a man's reproductive system, and it happens without any deliberate stimulation. But even so, when this happens to you,
distinction.
it would be good to examine whether you were dwelling on sexual thoughts before going to sleep. Could you have been sleeping in a position that stimulated you, such as with a blanket or pillow held tightly between your legs?
I just got a new blanket too.
If you're honest with yourself about these matters, it will help you to avoid falling into unclean practices.
All right. Well, I mean,
Okay.
speaking of masturbation, I think that thought experiment he's engaging in qualifies as masturbation, right? Like it's
Sure.
certainly just self-aggrandizing, and that. It's hysterical. Anyone who's ever listened to this podcast knows that that's one of my favorite things I've ever seen in my entire life. That is glorious.
Yeah.
But the underlying part of that, though, is like you were talking about this like control over every facet of your existence, and then especially knowing that this is like meant for people who are being brought into the inner sanctum.
Yes.
Is that you have to develop this ultra awareness, this like ultra denial of reality, of your own thoughts, of your own biology,
Because it's evil and it's by Satan. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's Satan trying to corrupt you. Yeah, no, it's pure control is what it is. I mean, the funny thing about that is how much he acts like a psychologist. Like, well, if you're having, an emission at night, well, are you thinking about sex before you go to bed? Really?
your thoughts.
I can't
dude.
think of how many psychologists would sit back
Yeah.
and say, okay, I can think of 1,000 things factually wrong with that that have
Yeah.
nothing to do with that.
Exactly. No, it's biological.
yeah.
Well, and even still, like we're talking about thoughts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's like if you tell somebody, don't think about a monkey, and you go, okay, no problem. You're going to, and you come back tomorrow and tell me what you thought about. You're going to come back tomorrow and be like, I couldn't stop thinking about monkeys.
Yeah.
It would be, that's a real thing in psychology where they're like, you tell somebody not to think about something or look at something. They can't help it. We're wired that way.
Yeah.
Well, why I'm not supposed to be thinking about monkeys? Or you're just sitting there going, don't think about monkeys. Don't think about monkeys. And what you're doing is thinking about monkeys. And a lot of times in these religious, especially like, because that video gets into some of the more like abhorrent anti-homosexual propaganda
Yes.
from the Jehovah's Witness Church. But anything like that you're ever exposed to, it's always highly sexualized. I wish you'd have sent this to me before, and I'll have you back when I have this video appropriately cut into the greatest hits segments. But there's parts in here where he's making like painting these erotic homosexual scenarios for people. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And it's like it doesn't make any sense to me that you're gonna somehow purge someone's mind of these thoughts by having them focus on them.
Or pray for it,
Yeah.
pray about it. It's
Exactly.
it gets even worse. There's another one. It's a lot shorter, but it's for women going into Bethel.
Yeah, I watched
and
some
it's
of that one also.
and I love how, or I shouldn't say I love it. I'm disgusted by how it's that typical.
Boy, isn't
bull-
that a thin line?
Yeah,
of
typical
loving and just
bullcrap
being disgusted
about-
by something because it's so horrible.
Yeah, it's. Well, you women should watch the way you dress, so you don't make men sin. Basically, is what
Oh
it
yeah,
is,
no,
a typical Christian.
Yeah, that video is mostly this guy saying, "Hey, men are sexual, so
Yeah.
if they act like assholes, that's your fault, ladies."
Yeah, because you dress the wrong way, and it's
Right. It's pretty abhorrent, and there's a lot of really gross stuff in both of those videos. It's funny too though, because the more of this I watched and the more dogma I read, I've always been very confused. I don't know if you know who Bill Hicks is. He was a stand-up comedian in the 90s. They've recently started putting some more of his stuff on Netflix because he died in his 30s. So he didn't really hit the peak of his career, and he was kind of out at a time where stand-up comedy wasn't like as enormous as it is now, obviously because of the internet. But he had a bit because he grew up, I guess, particularly religious, before he became a dirty stand-up comedian. And he has a bit where he is talking about Satan, and he's like, well, here's the thing I don't understand about Satan, right? Like, Satan can't be real or have any power because nothing can oppose God's will. It's in the Bible. He even does a thing where he takes the microphone away from his face and yells at the crowd. He's like, nothing can oppose God's will, right? Because that's it. That's what's in the book. It even says that. So it's always a very convenient fallback for the more brainwashy parts of religion to tell you that there's like the things that interest you or the things that are like designed to catch your eye are the work of Satan, and we're powerless to do anything about that. We're powerless to do anything about that, despite the fact that there's nothing that could oppose God's will. So what he's doing, I guess, is God's will. It's a mess.
Yeah, I think it's anything that might stop them from having power over you.
Of course.
All of a sudden it becomes Satan's will. And I know you didn't want to get into religion bashing,
no,
but I'm going
that's
to do
fine.
it anyway.
No,
so.
Let's go.
It floors me
it's
how...
a very tiny cork in that dam for me.
Hypocritical even the Bible itself is. You know, you get into issues where, you know, my favorite is the story about King David where, you know, he cheats on, you know, he sleeps with Bathsheba, a married woman, then, gets her pregnant, surprise, surprise. And then to cover it up, because her husband won't sleep with her, he kills her husband. And then, you know, the prophet comes in and says, you know, hey, this guy stole this, you know, killed this other guy for his vineyard. And David's sitting here going, we'll kill him, bring him before me. And he tells him, oh, it's you. Yeah. But it's not a vineyard. You killed this man after sleeping with his wife. And then all of a sudden it's all, oh, poor king.
Right.
Yeah, since you repented, since you said I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Then it's okay. But if it's somebody else, then we're gonna lop his head off.
Yeah,
well, this is so prominent there, and it permeates throughout religion.
Yeah, well, it's important too. It's the installment of the ideology that someone who is in a position of power is somehow kind of automatically superior to you and is deserving of your forgiveness and respect, even though you may not benefit from that same level of forgiveness and respect at their hand.
Yeah, and they can spend years just torturing you. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. But then all of a sudden they sin, and it becomes public knowledge. And they come back and they say, oh, it was stress. It was all these things. Because I'm at the top of the religion. I have sinned.
Heavy as the head,
yeah.
brother. Yeah, exactly.
Acting like they're the only ones that feel it. You know, it's disturbing.
And in large ways it is detestable, you know, and it's a battle I face ideologically with myself pretty regularly, is that I respect everyone's right to pursue life as they will. You get the one little trip, however you want to perceive your reality, provided it doesn't hurt anybody. I don't have a problem with it. Yeah. But it is always confusing to me when you take young people and you go, we have all the answers, even though anyone with any level of logical reasoning will have questions you don't have answers to, or at least questions that you don't have satisfactory answers to.
It's one thing I've noticed about, I finally realized about, becoming an adult is I'd say at least half the time we're making stuff up.
Of course.
we're just barely figuring out, and there aren't real answers to it. But, when it comes to this religion, to keep control, or any religion, it seems we do have all the answers.
Yeah. Well, and there's
it's
also
right here.
There's often a defense of religion that centers around like, oh, well, it kind of all follows the same through line. Like, hey, be kind to people, show love to people, be forgiving, like understand that everyone's going through something. And that is great. Like that's all of the great thinkers, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, you go back, Constantine even, like you go back as far as you want, all of the great thinkers, these are their ideas. Muhammad, like everyone was like, show respect, show love, even when you're not receiving it. And those are great messages. The problem is that almost every time you take these messages and you apply them to a giant organization, the actual message becomes you need to be very afraid of the way you are. And it's not like don't be afraid because you're not forgiving or showing love. That's almost never the message. It's like be afraid because you're not in lockstep. Like you're not just accepting what I tell you as gospel.
Yeah, there's never a point where you can become acceptable.
Right.
So exactly. and that's part of keeping you under the thumb.
Yeah.
Keeping you keeping your money, keeping your
well, and that's
and I think that's what it really boils down
of
to.
Course.
Is I think the Bible. I don't see it being like something divinely inspired. I think all of these religious books, the Bible, the Quran,
the Torah,
whatever they are, they were all somebody figured out a long time ago that if you truly want power, it isn't about money or about military might. You can control people through their faith. That's the most easy thing to control because it's so unknown
too.
Yeah, and you'll get all the rest of that. And so that's when I look at the Bible. We would constantly have to read through it, and there's some people that'll say the witnesses, well, they write their own Bible. Yeah, well, that's what everybody does.
Of course,
the King James version, all of it was rewritten by somebody.
Everybody has their own version, or a companion. Book,
and it follows the same as the King James version and all that. But the God they describe, I see as more as like a normal human king,
right?
Who was just trying to hold on to his power, and that's through fear. You've displeased me, so you must.
Absolutely, no. It's always blown my mind when you get into these theoretical these theological discussions about the nature of God. That's a big thing if you study religious history. Is not necessarily for you to learn about the nature of God, but for you to learn about how people have kicked around this idea of the nature of God, and everything I've learned about it. Even if it wasn't fed to me that way, what I delineated from all the information was there's only a big shift in the nature of God when it suits man. Like all the way up to Constantine, being a Christian means you're a pacifist. You do not fight. You will not kill. Constantine sees the cross in the sky and hears that, and the voices tell him, if you fight under this symbol, you will never lose. And then all of a sudden the text starts talking about, oh, well, here's when killing is all right. Because that was obviously a big shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament, was sort of the removal of a lot of the dark stuff, but now, okay, in these circumstances, it's okay to kill people. And it's, in these circumstances, it's okay to fight, and then there's a shift from when Jesus says give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God, when he's talking about money, well, then there's this shift again later where it's well, it's okay if the church needs your money in order to, continue to protect you from evil and ensure you're just buying your way into heaven. And you see it all the way up through the Middle Ages and into the feudal era and up into up into the Renaissance. And it when you break it down to its gut components, it's actually brilliant because you're telling all these poor people who can't read. First of all, they can't read. So you're oh yeah, this is what it says. It says it right here.
Yeah.
You show it to them. They can't tell you it doesn't. But then also you're look, life sucks. And I know I'm taking all your stuff, but when you die, you're totally going to get sorted out. Yeah. Trust me. Once you're dead, this will all make sense. And and no one comes back to dispute it. And that's something those people controlling that power have known for a long time, is that nobody comes back.
Yeah, and if they do, it ends up in a war. Yeah. So whoever wins the war gets to control, I think it was Nietzsche who said it, he controls the present, controls the past. So
yeah,
you do control history.
Accurate.
Yeah, you see it. So
the victors write the history. I mean, and that especially is prevalent in religion. You see the more prominent religions, emerge from the dust of all this infighting. That's actually, we'll go down this road. We got time. Okay. That's actually one of the things you learn about in early Christianity too, is there's sort of this misunderstanding, this misnomer that when Christianity emerged, it emerged from this world that was devoid of religion. Yeah. That the world was, everyone was just wandering around bumping into each other until Jesus came, and then you have Christianity and everything worked out from there. But actually, the world in which Christianity emerged a few hundred years after his death, or the historical Jesus's death, or however you look at it, from the emergence of that ideology, is a world of many religions. Mm-hmm. So it was basically every religion was clawing tooth and nail for as many followers as they could get. And it wasn't until Constantine came along, who was obviously an elite, and he was a member of a religion known as the Mithras. The Mithra religion existed then, and that's when you see a lot of the modern shifts in Christianity. It was a marketing campaign. the Mithras believed in a child of God who was born from a woman who hadn't laid with a man. His birthday's in December. He rose from the dead in the spring. Like all of these qualities of what was once sort of a secret religion among the elites of these ancient times. He takes a lot of these qualities and ascribes them to Jesus and Christianity, and now it's off and running because we're talking, now Christianity has some real muscle behind it, and now it becomes a popular religion, a religion of, that's why you see in Hinduism and a lot of the Eastern religions where they're willing to just, that's a God, we're happy with all the gods, like we're willing to worship them all. That doesn't make sense to people in the Western world because all of this religion was born from like almost like a capitalist marketing standpoint, like it was like, oh, do you like Judaism? Check this out,
And when was that? Was that the first century? Because this is
1066, I believe, is Constantine.
1060. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, see that makes sense to me because I've noticed, after I left and I had time. After I left the witnesses.
Sorry, this is only a few hundred years after. This is only a few hundred years AD.
Yeah, see, that makes sense to me because the only thing, the earliest versions of the Bible you'll find is the first century from everything I've ever found, and that's those Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yep.
That makes sense to me that, all of a sudden Christianity gets invented there in the first century. You've got a new Messiah and all that. Christians might have existed. But I lost my thought. I'm sorry, I was going somewhere with that.
There were Christians, but from what I understand, we're talking about like a very fringe group.
They were originally considered a cult and all that. Yeah. So, am I sitting too close?
No, you're fine. You're fine. Okay. I'm actually just turning myself down a little bit here.
Okay.
But I can go on and on and on and be like, off on the dates as greatly as possible. But the other thing is a lot of the symbolism, a lot of the ideology that we develop now, people look at and say, I don't think that prior to the marketing campaign, if you will, that the Christians would have wanted a symbol of a cross, because actually someone being crucified was seen as like them being denigrated. There's actually a lot of like ancient literature that talks about how Jesus maybe wasn't crucified, someone was crucified in his place. And that the mistranslation of the text is that he didn't come back to life. He just revealed himself to have not been crucified.
And that's actually where I was going, was the whole, that's one of the big things with the witnesses is they're like, oh, well, everything, normal Christianity, Catholic Church, Baptists, and everybody believe the cross and all that is all a lie.
Right.
It was all came from paganism. But if you look closely at everything that is blatantly Christian, praying is very much like the chanting they used to do.
Of course.
To the priest, anytime you'd present anything, to an altar, money or anything else was considered a sacrifice. It seems like a lot of the practices are just holdovers from paganism, no matter what the religion is.
Of course. Well, there wasn't any other blueprint for practicing religion, other than the yelling at the There has to be a guy in charge, and you yell at the sky and give him your stuff. I mean, that's pretty basic.
And I think that has more. It has more to do with our ability to our cognitive ability to fantasize and kind of reason through things. The people have. As a people, we have a tremendous imagination, and that's where religion, no matter where it is, can really grasp you. Is it can stimulate that imagination. Well,
it starts explaining things.
We're going to explain it, and you start imagining it, fantasizing about what they say will be the big deal.
Yeah. Natural phenomenon.
And you want to believe it, so you don't want to you don't want to give up on that. That's the grasp. So that's what faith is. You're going to believe no matter what the facts might say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have a buddy of mine who always says to Griff, who used to be the Coze's podcast back in the day. He always says that he feels like religion is just shitty science. Like at the time when religion, when whatever religion was around as we blinked into consciousness as a species. You know, there's all this crazy, there's electricity flying down from the sky. There's big giant holes in the ground. This part of the where we walked from looks completely different than this part. Yeah. There's all these animals and they kind of coexist, and we have like a weird spot in it. So religion was just sort of shitty science. Like, well, I'll tell you what happens. Yeah. You know, angels bowling, or, you know, a guy fell out of the sky and he landed here and he rotted, and that's why there's a canyon here, and there were giants who made these holes here, or whatever.
Yeah. They split his head open with an axe, and that's how we got the sun.
All that kind of stuff.
The old mythology. Yeah. It just made no sense, but, you know,
It is odd, though, as advanced as we claim ourselves to be, that we're still living in a world where there are people preying on people's belief in magic, essentially, in an effort to remove their individuality, their ability to think freely, and most importantly, the money from their pockets.
Yeah, and, you know, there are so many things we don't know about life. I mean, physics is still, you know, in its infancy, even with the amazing things we can do. Yeah. There's still millions of things we don't know. So, you know, and they still grasp on that. It still seems like we're working, you know, we're still kind of living inside our imagination a little bit where we think about it.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely the case. I mean, that's something Neil deGrasse Tyson always talks about too, the God of the gaps, where people will hear us having a conversation like this, where we say, well, you know, here's the things that the Bible explained. We actually have figured out a way to reproduce in labs explanations for these things that actually, here's the real reasons why these things happen. Yeah. But then eventually you hit this wall where it's like, okay, well, here's all this stuff we don't know. Right. And so religion will say, oh, okay, well, beyond that wall is God. Within that gap, that's where God is. But really what happens is you're just pushing this wall into our ignorance and like, okay, well, we figured this out. Okay, well, so now God's on the other side of that hill. And then you're like, no, here's what's on the other side of that hill. No, he's on the other side of that hill. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it does seem counterproductive. But like you said, too, it is all very similar, because whatever's on the other side of that hill, we're still in our own imagination. We're still thinking
about it. And we get impatient, too, I think is a big deal.
Absolutely.
I mean, and in this type of society we're in, when things happen 100 times faster than it did, you know, 50 or even 20 years ago, you know, I think we get extremely impatient. That explains people's crappy driving on summer days. But
yes.
Wrecking your car in the middle of a summer day, you know. Yeah.
I may have you back on I may have one day just have you back on, because for people who don't know, after James left Wyoming, he was an over-the-road trucker for a while. Oh, yeah. And one day I'd like to maybe just throw a couple beers in you and have you talk about traffic.
That's going to involve a lot of cussing, and you might need something for me to punch.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll get some cheap glass in here for you to throw at the walls. Yeah. Well, so I mean, I think that's time, unless you had anything real specific you wanted to lay down.
Good,
Did you enjoy yourself?
Yeah,
Not too
that
bad,
was fun.
Right?
Yeah. See, I was a little nervous, but
it always feels weird at the beginning. But I'm an idiot, so you don't have to feel like you're up against some.
I didn't expect it to be a test. So
exactly.
There's not a test, is there?
God,
okay,
no.
good.
I hope
because I didn't study, man.
No. Yeah, but it was good, man. I think you did great, and it's definitely part of the exercise. A lot of first-time people, when they come in, they're always a little like nervous out of the gate, but it's just a conversation, and it was fun. I really appreciate you doing this too, though.
No
I know it touched on some.
It was good. Yeah.
I know it touched on some things that are close to your heart. So I hope I didn't make a mess of it. But so I'd like to thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, and I want to make sure it's on the podcast before I end this, I think you should write a book or start a podcast or do something.
Here's the thing about that, and I'll try and make it quick.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
There's already been like 1,000 books by people. Me personally, once I left, I want to leave it behind. I want to. If there's one thing I could erase from my history, it's that damn little badge that says I was a Jehovah's Witness, because it's not something I want to dwell on anymore. It's too poisonous. It can kill somebody, and it has killed people. It has driven them to suicide and drugs and stuff. I don't
just
want
turns
that.
into bile inside you. No reason to keep it.
When it comes to that, I don't. While we talk about it and I think about it sometimes, I'm not one who's going to go out there and actively push at these things, because I want it done.
It's gone. It's behind you.
Yeah.
That's absolutely respectable.
Yep.
I understand that. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back after this episode to our usual greasy butthole dolphin rape conversations, but hopefully you enjoyed this one. Good night, everyone.
Welcome. 1 gram. 1 gram. Welcome to the
1 Gram Army Podcast.
Welcome 1 gram. Welcome.
1 gram.
Welcome. 1 gram. Welcome to the
1 Gram Army Podcast.